I was 25 years old when my parents took me to a candlelit restaurant to tell me I had never really been theirs. My mom smiled when she said it. Not a sad smile, not an apologetic one. The kind of smile you wear when you've finally finished a task that's been sitting on your to-do list too long. My dad pushed a folder of legal documents across the white tablecloth like he was sliding a receipt across a counter. They had already filed, already signed, already decided. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I sat very still for almost a full minute and let them believe they had won. But here's what neither of them knew. 6 months before that dinner, I had found my biological family. And that night, I had asked them to sit 4 tables behind my mother's chair. She just hadn't turned around yet. What happened when she finally did is the reason I'm sitting here, 6 years later, telling you any of this. Welcome back to Hidden Karma Stories. If this is your first time here, we tell real stories about dignity, boundaries, and the moment someone finally stops performing for people who were never actually in their corner. Hit subscribe before we go any further, because this one goes deep. The restaurant was called Harlow's. It was on the nicer side of downtown Cincinnati, the kind of place with cloth napkins folded into little peaks and servers who introduced themselves by name. My mom, Carol, had picked it. That detail mattered more than it sounds, because Carol Bennett did not spend money generously. She spent it strategically. She was wearing the navy blazer she reserved for situations where she needed to look like the reasonable one. My dad, Frank, had made the reservation under his own name, not mine, which I noticed when the hostess asked, and he answered before I could open my mouth. There was no banner, no flowers, no dessert pre-ordered with candles in it. For a birthday dinner, the table was oddly bare of anything celebratory, and the air between my parents had the careful, clipped politeness of 2 people who had rehearsed their lines on the drive over. I had spent 4 years doing paralegal work in a trusts and estates firm. I had sat across from families in moments exactly like this one. I knew the difference between a dinner and a document delivery. This was the second thing. I counted the tables without looking like I was counting them. That's when I spotted the small numbered stand on the table 4 rows back and to the left. Table 11. I held it in my mind the way you hold a landmark you're not sure you'll need yet, but file away just in case. I set my own item beside my water glass. A plain manila folder, nothing written on the front. My mom glanced at it the way you glance at something you've already decided isn't important. She had no idea what was inside it. To understand why none of this surprised me, you have to understand what birthdays meant in our house growing up. When I was small, my birthday meant a store-bought cupcake, usually grabbed from the gas station down the street, set on the kitchen counter while my mom took a phone call in the next room. No party, no streamers, no friends invited over. Meanwhile, 3 weeks later, my cousin Marcus, the son of my mom's sister Deborah, would have an actual catered backyard party with a bounce castle and a DJ my aunt had rented from a company 2 towns over. Because Marcus was Deborah's son. Marcus was blood. I remember being 8 years old, standing in Deborah's kitchen during one of those parties, asking my mom quietly if I could maybe have a few friends over for mine next year. My aunt overheard and answered for her, the way adults do when they've already discussed the subject without you. "We can only do so much, honey." She said it warmly. That was the part that taught me the most. How gentle a person's voice can stay while they are explaining to a child that she is the exception to every rule. So I learned the math early. I stopped asking for parties. I stopped asking for extras. I made myself easy because I understood somewhere in my bones that easy was the only currency I had access to. I told myself I was practical. I told myself I didn't mind. That is the thing about growing up valuable only as long as you're convenient. You don't realize you've been priced until someone reads the number out loud. And across that white tablecloth at Harlow's, I could feel Carol Bennett getting ready to read it. I left the house the week I turned 18 with a duffel bag, an acceptance letter to the community college I had applied to by myself, and no one driving me to the door. I want to be honest about something here, not because it makes me extraordinary, but because it matters for what comes later. Nobody helped me. I worked the closing shift at a pharmacy 3 nights a week and took morning classes. I transferred to the state university after 2 years and finished a paralegal certificate while waiting tables on weekends. Every semester, every textbook, every application fee, I covered it myself. By 25, I had a job I was genuinely good at. I spent my days inside other people's wills, their trusts, their carefully constructed plans for who gets what and who gets nothing once they're gone. I read the language of inheritance the way some people read faces. I knew what a beneficiary designation meant. I knew what a distribution schedule was. I knew that the words a document uses matter more than the words a family uses at a dinner table. The irony, the one that lived in my chest like a splinter for years, was this. I could advocate fiercely for a total stranger's legal rights. I could tell a grieving client what she was owed down to the penny. But I could not, for the life of me, stop trying to earn the approval of two people who had never once offered it without a condition attached. The one person who ever made me feel like I belonged unconditionally was my grandmother, my dad's mom, Grammy Rose. Every Sunday at 3 o'clock, I called her all through college, all through my first years at the firm. She picked up like she'd been waiting by the phone. She was the only Mercer, the only asterisk Bennett in that whole family who talked to me like I was already enough. When I was 12 and crying at her kitchen table because Marcus had told me I wasn't a real Bennett, she dried her hands on her dish towel, looked me straight in the eye, and said the sentence I kept for the next 13 years. You weren't an accident, sweetheart. You were a decision. Then she made me hot chocolate and let me fall asleep on her couch watching old game shows. Grammy Rose died when I was 23. I gave the eulogy. Within 2 months of her funeral, my parents quietly moved out of the split level they'd been in for years and into Grammy Rose's house, the larger one on Clover Lane, the one the estate had been connected to in ways I didn't fully understand yet. I was too deep in grief to examine it at the time. But she had said something to me in one of our last phone calls, her voice going thin and papery the way voices do near the end, that I tucked away without quite understanding. I made sure in writing that you'll never have to go looking for what's yours. I thought she was comforting me, being a grandmother. It would take 6 months and a trip to the county clerk's office to understand she had meant it as a legal fact. About a year before my birthday dinner, something shifted in my family. The group text slowed down. My mom stopped copying me on holiday plans, then acted puzzled when I showed up to Thanksgiving without the green bean casserole no one had asked me to bring. My Aunt Deborah started using a specific word in the family chat that she'd never used before. Blood. As in, this year's Lake weekend is just going to be blood. As in, we want to keep the cabin time to immediate blood family. People don't cool off on a schedule. Families drift, yes, but drift is gradual and uneven. This was synchronized. It had the feeling of something coordinated, and the part of my brain trained to notice patterns in document filings kept quietly flagging it. 3 invoices landing on the same Tuesday, all from different senders, all connected. So when my phone lit up one evening in February with my mom's name and a voice 2 full degrees warmer than it had been in months, I didn't feel flattered. I felt the particular chill of a lock turning somewhere I couldn't locate. Sweetheart, asterisk, she said, and Carol only used sweetheart when she needed traction. We want to do something proper for your 25th. The way we never quite pulled off when you were little. Every professional instinct I'd built over 4 years of reading other people's bad news said the same thing. This is too smooth. This has been prepared. Here's what most people misread about my mother. They assume the cruelty is loud. It isn't. The cruelty is the planning. The cruelty is a woman who couldn't manage a birthday cake for 24 years, suddenly booking a corner table at Harlow's and calling it asterisk doing right by you. When Carol turns generous, a spreadsheet somewhere has already told her the generosity will return on its investment. So I said yes sweetly, the way she'd taught me to, and the second I hung up I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet for a long time and did what I do. I thought about timelines. I thought about the house on Clover Lane. I thought about the word asterisk blood appearing in the family chat at exactly this season, and about the thing Grammy Rose had said on the phone before she died. And I thought about the manila folder already sitting in my work bag, the one I had put together 6 months earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with my mother, and everything to do with finally knowing where I came from. I didn't call her back with questions. I didn't warn her I'd been to the county records office. Instead, I made a few quiet phone calls of my own. People assume a story like this is really about money. I understand the assumption. There's a house, a trust, a folder on a tablecloth. But sitting in my car in the Harlow's parking lot that night, engine off, hands resting still on the steering wheel, the thing I was most afraid of losing had no dollar value attached. I was afraid of losing the last story I had about where I came from. Because as transactional as that house had been, as calculated as every cupcake and every winter coat handed down from Marcus with Deborah's return tags still on the pocket, it was still the only origin I'd had. And if they cut that thread tonight the way I could feel them preparing to cut it, I would be exactly what my 12-year-old self had been told she was. Nobody's real daughter. That's the wound they were aiming for. They knew it because they'd been pressing on it since I was small. What they hadn't accounted for was that the wound had already closed. 6 months can do that, if the right people find you. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked across the parking lot with the particular calm of someone who has already read the ending of the story everyone else at the table thinks is still being written. We ordered drinks before anyone said anything true. My mom praised the lighting. My dad told a story about finding parking that I'd already heard in the car. And then somewhere between the bread and the entree none of us would touch, Carol folded her hands on the tablecloth and shifted into the voice. I know that voice. It's the one she used the time she returned my birthday present at the store in front of me and explained quietly to the clerk that it hadn't been what we'd hoped. We've always done everything we could for you, she started. Frank nodded a half beat behind her, the way he'd been nodding behind her for 30 years. We gave you a home, stability, opportunities that a lot of children never see. I let her go. I kept one hand flat on the manila folder beside my plate and I watched my dad's eyes drift down to it and away. The folder had a label on the tab, typed, just the top edge visible above my fingers. He could read enough of it to get nervous. I left my thumb across the rest of it and let the wondering do its work. Carol talked about sacrifice. She talked about what a child costs and what a parent gives up. I thought about a gas station cupcake sweating on a kitchen counter, and I said nothing. Then she set her wine glass down with the precision of a woman who has practiced the exact moment of this reveal, and she said the line she had driven across town to say. Paige, there's something you should have been told a long time ago. You're adopted. She watched my face while she said it. I understood that she was waiting for the collapse. The whole evening, the corner table, the blazer, the rehearsed pauses. All of it had been scaffolding built around this single moment when her adopted daughter learned she'd been a stranger all along and came apart at the seams. I would love to tell you it didn't land. It landed. Some part of a person always expects the floor to be there, and mine had just been told there was no floor. But I had known this for 6 months, and the only thing my mother had actually revealed was how little she knew about me. She leaned in, almost gentle, and said the sentence I will hear in quiet moments for the rest of my life. We only kept you for the tax benefits, sweetheart, and she smiled when she said it. That smile, not cruelty, not guilt, choreography, a woman who had rehearsed this moment enough times to arrive at something like satisfaction. And in that smile, I finally saw the full shape of everything I had half known for years. I hadn't been a daughter who had fallen short. I had been an asset that had finished depreciating. My dad, to his credit in the smallest possible sense, tried to frame it like a financial explanation. There were adoption subsidies when you were young, he said, not meeting my eyes. The state paid a small monthly support for the first several years, and there were tax advantages through most of elementary school. And your grandmother, he said carefully, without saying her name like she was a person, had certain expectations about family. Adopting you had helped us meet those expectations, and meeting them had been, in his words, beneficial for quite a long time. I sat very still and let the arithmetic of my childhood rearrange itself into its true shape. The second-hand clothes from Marcus, with the department store tags still attached. The heat turned down in my room first when they wanted to save on utilities. The way every birthday felt like an afterthought they had budgeted a specific amount for. They hadn't been struggling. They'd been pocketing the margin between what a child generates and what they bothered to spend on her. "We invested in you," Frank said, as if that phrase was supposed to settle something. Then Carol, impatient with his accounting, got to the real line, the one underneath all the others, the one the entire dinner had been constructed to deliver. "The benefits ended years ago, Paige, and what little came after ends today. You're 25 now. There's nothing left that keeping this going does for us." She said it with a faint air of regret, the way you'd note that a gym membership had lapsed. 2 sentences, and she had reduced 25 years of being their daughter to a subscription they were finally canceling. I reached for my water glass. My hand did not shake. Then Frank did the thing he had come to do. He opened the leather portfolio beside his plate, the one I had assumed held a birthday card, and slid a small stack of papers across the tablecloth until the edge touched my plate. "We've already filed," he said. "You won't be listed in our will. You won't be a beneficiary on anything. We wanted to handle this in person so there's no confusion down the road." He had rehearsed the phrase asterisk in person. I could hear the attorney who'd coached him in the word choices. I picked up the first page and read the caption in about 4 seconds, the way I'd read 1,000 of them. And I saw immediately what they had done. They had aimed their legal maneuvering at the wrong document entirely. They had spent real money, a lawyer's hourly rate and filing fees, and probably a follow-up consultation, cutting me out of an estate that was almost beside the point, while leaving completely untouched the instrument that actually controlled everything. They didn't know what I knew. I did not correct them. You do not tell the other side. They filed against the wrong defendant. You let them finish. So I slid the papers an inch back toward the center of the table, not accepting, not refusing, and I let them keep believing they'd won. From somewhere inside my mom's purse, on speakerphone, my Aunt Deborah's voice arrived. "Blood takes care of blood, Paige, warm as a knife in warm water. You've always understood that, honey." I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because part of me had expected to. Some version of my 12-year-old self had been braced for exactly this table since the night Marcus told her she wasn't real. But 25-year-old me just turned my water glass a slow quarter rotation on the cloth and watched something move across my mom's face I had genuinely never seen there before. Disappointment, not at me, at the performance. She had written this scene with a girl dissolving in the lead role. The girl wasn't dissolving, and it was ruining her ending. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she asked, and the edge in it told me everything. I considered the question. I considered the full 25 years of things I could have said. And then she made the mistake people like her always make. She filled the silence by reaching back to the line that had worked the first time. "We only kept you for the benefits," she repeated, slower, leaning on each word like a key she was pressing harder because the door wasn't opening. But a sentence loses its power the second time it comes from the same mouth. The first time, it had been a revelation. The second time, it was just a confession. And a confession not about me. It told me everything about her and nothing about my worth. I smoothed my napkin across my lap and let her watch me not break. Behind her, at table 11, I saw a woman with my exact jawline turn slowly toward our table and go very still. To explain what was in my folder, I have to take you back 6 months to the week 2 envelopes arrived and rearranged the arithmetic of my entire life. The first one I had been half expecting. After Grammy Rose died, I had registered with the state's adoption reunion registry, more out of grief than real hope. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived in handwriting I didn't recognize, careful and deliberate, the hand of someone who had practiced what she wanted to say and then crossed it out and practiced again. It was from a woman named Linda Marsh. She wrote that she had been 20 years old when she gave me up, that she had not wanted to, that every year in March she had thought about me, and that if I ever wanted to meet, she would drive any distance, any day, no conditions attached. She signed it, and then, under her name, she had written one more line, the one I read until the paper went soft from handling. "There has always been a place for you here. I just didn't know if you knew that." The second envelope arrived 3 days later, and had nothing to do with Linda at first. Our state had opened original birth records to adult adoptees, and I had filed my request the same week Linda's letter arrived. While I was in the county system, I pulled up a file I had no particular plan to use. Grammy Rose's estate records. Professional habit. The way a mechanic looks at a car's engine even when nobody asked. And there it was, buried in the distribution schedule of the Rose Ellen Bennett Family Trust, executed 2 years before her death and administered by a bank, not by my parents. The language was precise and exactly the kind I drafted for clients. The caregiver distributions to Frank and Carol Bennett shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, at which time the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. Not their estate, hers, held by a corporate trustee my parents couldn't touch, scheduled to transfer out of their reach on the exact date they had chosen for that dinner. 2 envelopes in 1 week. One told me where I had come from. The other told me, in my grandmother's notarized handwriting, exactly what my parents were about to lose and why they were suddenly in such a hurry. I didn't call Carol and say what I knew. That's not the tool I trust. I've watched too many people blow a winning hand on the satisfaction of a single outburst. What I had was process. So I used process. I took a personal day, drove the trust documents to an estate's attorney with no connection to my family, and paid her out of my own savings to confirm what I suspected. The caregiver distributions were real, ongoing, and ending by their own terms. My parents had been receiving a monthly sum for years for the act of raising me, while living in the home the trust funded. The remainder, the actual value Grammy Rose had accumulated over a lifetime, passed to me through the bank trustee on my birthday, untouched by anything my parents could file or sign or shred. Their will was theater. Their disownment was a performance on the wrong stage. My attorney asked if I wanted to notify them, get ahead of it, soften the landing. I said no. I said I wanted 3 things in a folder, and that was all. The retainer letter, so they'd know I had legal representation. The trust's distribution schedule, so they'd see the date in black and white. And my original birth certificate, with Linda Marsh's name printed in the mother's line, so that when the moment came, the table would understand exactly which family I was choosing to walk toward, and which one I was choosing to leave. I labeled the tab, closed the folder, carried it for 6 months like a quiet engine I hadn't switched on yet. The dinner invitation only told me when to turn the key. I met Linda Marsh for the first time at a diner off the highway, halfway between our cities, because she had insisted on splitting the drive, and that small consideration hit me harder than any prepared speech could have. She was nervous. She'd brought a photo album she kept touching and then pulling back, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right to show it yet. She had my jawline and my habit of going quiet when I felt too much. Over the next 6 months, we built something carefully, the way you repair a bridge while you're still standing on it. I learned I had a half-brother named Kyle, 21 years old, who texted me a meme within 48 hours of our first meeting as if I had always been in the group chat. I learned that Linda's mother, Grandma Bev, was a small, sharp-tongued woman who took one look at me when we met on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "Well, there you finally are." Like I'd been stuck in traffic, not gone for a quarter century. They never asked me for anything. That was the part my nervous system could not process. No favors, no performances, no roles to audition for. Linda told me, the 3rd time we sat down together, the sentence that became the truest thing anyone had said to me in years. "We kept a spot for you. We never filled it with anyone else." And I, who could draft a flawless trust amendment for a stranger, who knew the exact legal language of belonging, sat in a vinyl booth and did not know what to do with my hands. Because I was wanted by people who got nothing out of wanting me. After 25 years of being useful, I had no idea how to simply be welcome. I had to learn that quickly. There is a real difference between being needed and being wanted. I had only ever lived inside the first one. Being needed, I understood completely. Being needed is a role with a job description. You show up easy. You cost less than you produce. You don't ask for more than the table has decided you're worth. And in exchange, you get to keep your seat another season. What Linda and Kyle and Grandma Bev were offering had no job attached to it. And that was more disorienting than anything my mother had ever done. The first time Linda called just to see how my week was going, no agenda, no favor underneath it, I waited the whole call for the catch. When there wasn't one, I had to pull over on the way home because I couldn't see the road. I tested them in small ways I'm not proud of. Canceled a plan last minute to see if they'd punish me for it. They didn't. They said, no worries at all next time. I kept offering to pay for everything, making myself useful, buying my seat. Grandma Bev finally put both hands on my face, the way Grammy Rose used to, and said, you don't have to pay admission here. We're the ones who were late finding you. And slowly, over those 6 months, a knot I had been carrying since I was 9 years old began not to disappear, but to loosen. I started to believe that a person could simply want me in the room. So when Carol called to invite me to celebrate 25 asterisk properly, I already knew where I wanted to spend that evening. I just decided to spend it everywhere at once. The night my mom booked Harlow's, I called Linda and asked her the thing I had been too afraid to ask anyone. Will you come to my birthday dinner? I explained the whole shape of it. My parents, the trust I had found, the legal move I could see them preparing. I told her I didn't know exactly what they planned to say, but I knew I didn't want to receive it alone, and I knew I was done performing the grief they were counting on. Linda didn't pause for even a second. When and where, she said, and should we dress up? And then she said the thing that made me press my hand over my mouth in my kitchen. We would be so honored to watch you not need them. So I made one more call, this one to Harlow's, and I reserved a second table for that same evening under my own name. Paige Bennett, party of 3. Table 11, they told me, near the back, 4 tables behind the reservation already on the books for a Bennett party of 3 up front. I almost laughed at the geometry of it. They had no idea they'd be performing my disownment in full view of the people who had been saving me a chair for 6 months. I told Linda and Kyle and Grandma Bev to arrive a little after us, to order something, to simply be there, and to let me come to them when I was ready. I won't pretend I didn't want them in that room. I did. There's a reason truth lands differently when it's spoken in front of witnesses. I had watched enough family confrontations from the professional side to know that a private one becomes the other side's word against yours. But Linda and Kyle and Grandma, Bev, were never just witnesses to me. And that was the whole difference between what they were doing and what Carol was doing. The folder was how I'd make my parents understand they had lost. Table 11 was where I'd go to remember I had already won. Back at the front table, Carol decided the silence had stretched long enough and moved to close the deal. She produced one more page from Frank's leather portfolio, turned it to face me, uncapped a pen, and set it across the paper like a small courtesy. It's just an acknowledgement, she said, that we've informed you that you understand. Sign it, and we can have a civilized rest of the evening and part cleanly. I picked up the page and read the opening paragraph in about 3 seconds. I've read that paragraph 100 times in other configurations. It opened with the standard boilerplate. The undersigned hereby waives and forever releases any claim, interest, or expectancy. It was not an acknowledgement. It was a waiver dressed as one. A document designed to have me confirm on the record, while still bleeding from the reveal, that I had no claim to anything. The kind of thing a careful attorney drafts to head off exactly the challenge I was in a position to bring. They wanted my signature before the shock wore off. It's a classic move. I've watched grieving people sign away inheritances at kitchen tables because someone slid a pen over at exactly the right wounded moment. Carol was counting on my wound. She didn't know it had a trust attached to it. I left the pen where it was. My dad had been watching my folder since we sat down. I watched the worry travel up his neck. Frank had always been the one in the family who understood where the money actually lived. He'd seen enough of the tab label. He was running numbers now, and the numbers were starting to scare him. He started, stopped. Is there something we should know about, Paige? I gave him the first real smile of the evening. Not yet, I said. That was when my Aunt Deborah arrived in person, with Marcus trailing behind her, both of them performing the surprise of people who had been waiting in the bar for a text message. Paige, what a coincidence, Deborah said, pressing a cool cheek to mine. And I understood in that moment that Carol had called for reinforcements. My mom liked an audience for her best work, and she especially liked one that would nod along and apply pressure if the other person got difficult. Deborah pulled up a chair without waiting to be invited. Marcus gave me the look he had been giving me since childhood. The one that said asterisk, you were always going to end up at the kids' table eventually. Deborah got to the point, because she had never had a use for indirection. We just want what's right for the family asterisk, she said, covering my mom's hand with her own. And sometimes families have to make hard choices about who's really part of them. You've always been such a sensible girl, Paige. You understand that blood has to look after blood. There it was again, out loud now, at the table it had been designed for. I looked at my aunt, who had explained my worth to me on my 8th birthday with a warm smile and a glass of my mom's wine, and I felt the last thread of obligation loosen and drop. These were not people I was losing. These were people I was setting down. I had carried them a long way, further than they deserved, and my arms were finally, gloriously tired. Across the table, my dad had gone quiet. He wasn't joining in. He was staring at the tablecloth. And then, while Deborah was mid-sentence about family loyalty, Frank leaned toward me and said something low, just for me. Your Grammy Rose loved you, that was all. 4 words, and then he stopped. For a moment, I saw the whole other version of Frank Bennett, the one who might have existed if he had ever once chosen the harder thing over the comfortable one. His eyes had gone wet. He had loved his mother. I knew that much was true. And somewhere in him, he understood that the woman he'd loved had built a legal wall around me precisely because she didn't trust her own son to protect me. That had to be a painful thing to sit with at a restaurant table. I waited, I genuinely waited, because there was a version of that night where Frank said the next sentence, where he said, I'm sorry, this is wrong, I won't do this, and I would have heard it and it would have meant something real. But he glanced at Carol, who was watching him the way a coach watches a player who's wandered off the play, and I watched him choose. He sat back. He picked up his water glass. And the almost sentence died in his throat, the way his almost sentences had always died. That was the closest thing to love the front table offered me all evening. 4 words and a swallow. I didn't hate him for it. You can't hate someone for being exactly the weight you always knew they were. But I understood finally that the reason for the rushed, clumsy cruelty of the whole evening was sitting behind his wet eyes. He knew about Grammy Rose's trust. He had known the date was coming, and he had hoped desperately to get my signature on a waiver before I learned what his mother had built for me in silence. So I asked him a question in the voice I use at the firm when I've found the flaw in someone's filing, and I'm giving them the dignity of noticing it themselves first. Dad asterisk, I said, which instrument did you file against? Your estate or Grammy Rose's trust? The table went quiet in a new way. Carol's wine glass paused halfway to her mouth. Deborah's hand stopped moving. Frank blinked at me the way you blink when someone starts speaking a language you half recognize from somewhere you once visited and can't quite place. Because in one question, I had told them 3 things they had not budgeted for. That I knew there was a difference between the two. That I knew which one mattered. And that I had known long enough to memorize the language cold. What are you talking about? My mom said, and it came out smaller than she meant. I let the question sit. The most powerful position in any room belongs to the person who doesn't need to rush to the answer. I turned my water glass a slow quarter turn on the cloth. And then I opened the folder. No drama, no speech. I simply turned it to face them and laid the 3 pages out on the white tablecloth, side by side, the way you'd lay exhibits in front of a client who needs to understand the reality of their situation before they make it worse. The retainer letter first, with the firm's letterhead and the unmistakable confirmation that I had legal representation. The distribution schedule of the Rose Ellen Bennett Family Trust, with the relevant paragraph visible for anyone at the table to read without squinting. And my original birth certificate, with Linda Marsh's name in the mother's field, where my mom had assumed her own name was. I didn't point to anything. I let the paper do what paper does. Carol's eyes went to the trust schedule first, because some part of her had always known where the weight of the evening actually lived. I watched her read it. I watched the words go in. The caregiver distributions to Frank and Carol Bennett shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, at which time the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. I watched her reach the word asterisk remainder, and then her own name. And then she looked up at Frank, and then back at the page, the way people do when they're hopping the second reading will be kinder than the first. It wasn't. It never is. Mom, asterisk, I said, and I said it gently because I could afford to now. You filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one. Carol is a fast processor. I'll give her that. Even caught completely off guard, it took her about 10 seconds to assemble the full picture. The house on Clover Lane, funded by a trust she had assumed would run forever. The monthly distributions that had quietly supplemented her comfortable life, ending tonight by their own terms. The remainder, the real accumulated value, passing to the daughter she had just announced she was finished with, through a bank trustee my parents couldn't touch or contest or redirect. And the waiver, her clever, careful waiver, which I had been 4 seconds from signing, which would have been worth exactly nothing, because it released a claim on an estate that had never been where the value was. She had aimed every weapon she had at a will and missed the trust entirely. The cruelty had cost her nothing. The mistake had cost her everything. And here is where I learned the last thing my mother had left to teach me, that people like her don't apologize at the moment they're caught. They pivot. Her face reorganized itself. The cold drained out and a terrible softness flooded in. She reached across the table for my hand. Paige, asterisk, she said, and her voice had gone gentle in a way it had never once been when it cost her something. We're still your parents. Whatever those papers say, we're still family. The word asterisk family. From the mouth that 20 minutes earlier had said, we only kept you for the benefits. I looked at her hand, reaching for mine. I did not take it. People expect this is the part where I made them pay, where I announced the dollar amount of the remainder, where I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and left them the bill. I understand the appetite for it. I've felt it. But I want to tell you the truth about power, because I handle it for a living. The strongest position in any room is not the one holding the largest number. It's the one that doesn't need the number at all. I had a career I had built from nothing. I had savings I had earned waiting tables and drafting documents at 11 o'clock at night. I did not need Grammy Rose's remainder to be free. I was already free. And that, more than any figure on a trust schedule, was what my mother could not survive understanding. So I closed the folder. I gathered the 3 pages back into it unhurried, and I kept their pen and set it down beside Carol's plate. The pen they had brought for my surrender. I'd already won the thing they thought we were fighting over before any of them sat down. I'd won it by knowing, by preparing, by refusing to be ambushed at a table someone else had reserved. There was nothing left to argue. There was only the choice of where to spend the rest of my birthday. And I had made that choice 6 months ago in a vinyl diner booth, when a nervous woman with my jawline slid a photo album across the table and didn't ask me for a single thing in return. I stood up. I did it the way you'd rise from any table. No announcement, no ceremony, just a woman pushing her chair back and reaching for her folder. The effect on the front table was immediate. Carol's hand was still in the air where mine should have been. Sit down, she said, and the warm maternal version of her vanished and the cold, controlled one returned like a snap of elastic. Sit down, Paige. Where exactly do you think you're going? Deborah straightened. Marcus stopped smirking. My dad just looked tired. The way a man looks when he watches the only good thing his mother ever did walk permanently out of his reach. I picked up the folder and held it flat against my chest. And I looked at Carol Bennett, who had spent 25 years and one expensive dinner trying to make me believe I had no real place anywhere. And I told her where I was going. My birth family is sitting 4 tables behind you. I didn't say it with cruelty. I didn't need to. The sentence had been true for the entire meal. True while she smiled and rehearsed and slid her waver across the tablecloth. True the whole time. She had believed she was performing my disownment to a room full of strangers. She hadn't been performing it to strangers. She had been performing it within walking distance of the people who had kept a chair empty for me since before she decided I had stopped being useful. I watched the words cross the table. I watched my mother begin, very slowly, to turn around. She turned the way you turn when part of you already knows and is begging the rest of you to be wrong. The navy blazer rotated. Her chin came around. And there at table 11, 4 tables back, beneath the warm amber light of the restaurant, were Linda and Grandma Bev and Kyle. They had been there the whole time. They had ordered quietly and eaten almost nothing. They had watched my mother deliver the worst sentences of my life and held their seats and their composure because I had asked them to wait for me to come to them. Linda met my mother's eyes first. She didn't glare. She didn't perform anything. She just looked at the woman who had raised her daughter on a gas station cupcake and a subsidy check. And then she looked at me, and her whole face opened. Grandma Bev had her napkin already folded on the table beside her plate, ready. Kyle had put his phone face down. My mother's gaze moved from Linda's jawline to mine and back again, doing the resemblance arithmetic. And I watched the exact moment she understood that the family she had just told me I didn't belong to was sitting 15 feet away, in real chairs, at a real table, having witnessed the one thing she could never take back. She turned back to me, her mouth opened, nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had no script. And in the silence where her next line should have been, a chair scraped back at table 11. They stood up, all 3 of them, not to make a scene, not to confront anyone, just to be on their feet when I crossed the room, the way you stand for someone arriving at a gate after a flight that took longer than it should have. Grandma Bev stood first, because Grandma Bev does everything first. Then Linda. Then Kyle, who knocked his knee on the table leg in his hurry and didn't slow down. They didn't say a word to my parents. They didn't have to. Their standing said everything. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. That particular hush that falls over a room when strangers can feel that something real is happening and have stopped pretending to look elsewhere. A server froze mid-step. Someone at the bar set their glass down. I walked past Carol, who was still half-turned in her chair. Past Deborah, whose mouth had finally run out of the word asterisk blood. Past my dad, who lifted his eyes to me as I passed and then dropped them again, choosing comfort one last time. 15 feet, 4 tables, 25 years. When I reached them, Grandma Bev put both hands on my face, the way Grammy Rose used to, and Linda pulled out the chair beside her own, the 4th one, the extra one they had asked the host to set, even though their reservation was for 3. And she said the lines she had written at the bottom of her letter, the one the paper had gone soft from my reading it over and over. "We kept your seat open," she said. "We always did." And I sat down in it. In the seat that had always been mine, at the table that had wanted me before I knew it existed. That was when Carol lost the one thing she had never once lost in public. Her composure. I heard her chair scrape, heard her stand, heard the careful, controlled version of herself crack clean down the center. "After everything we gave you," she said, and it wasn't quiet anymore. It carried across the dining room, sharp and rising. "After every year, every dollar, every sacrifice, you do this to us. In public, you humiliate your family in front of strangers over money." Heads turned openly. A man at the bar who had been minding his own business put down his drink. Deborah was tugging at Carol's sleeve, hissing, "Carol, sit down, people are starring." But my mother had finally run out of script. And with no script left, the truth came out the only way it knew how. "We gave you everything," asterisk she said, to a room full of people who didn't know us. And I noticed she said gave, not loved, even now, even cornered. Even in the most unguarded moment of her life, the word love would not come, because it had never been part of the inventory. I stayed in my seat at table 11. I didn't stand to match her. I didn't raise my voice. Linda's hand had found mine under the table, and I held it, and I let Carol be loud because the loudness was doing my work for me. Every person in that restaurant was watching a composed young woman sitting quietly with people who clearly adored her, while a furious older woman across the room shouted about everything she had paid for. There is not a single human being alive who hears a parent screaming about expenditures and thinks, "Ah, there's the real family." My dad didn't stand at all. He put his face in his hands. I let her run out of words the way a storm eventually runs out of rain. And when the quiet came back, I did one final thing before I gave my full attention to the table I actually wanted to be at. I stood, walked the 4 tables back to the front, and set one page down on the white cloth in front of Carol, the trust's distribution schedule, face up. "You can keep that one," I said. "You'll want to read it through when you get home. It'll explain what ended tonight and what didn't." She stared at the page. Frank reached for it and then didn't. And I looked at the two of them, my mom who had priced me at 1 candle, and my dad who had loved his mother too much to honor what she had asked of him, and I said the only sentence I had prepared in advance, the one I had written in my head in the parking lot, waiting to use only if I earned it. "You kept me for the benefits," I said. "They kept a seat for me." Then I turned around and walked back to table 11. And I did not look behind me, not once, not when Deborah called my name, not when Carol said something I couldn't hear and didn't want to. I sat down beside Linda. Grandma Bev had ordered me a slice of the chocolate layer cake while I was gone. Kyle had found the little tea candle from the table's centerpiece and pressed it into the frosting. 1 candle. The symmetry of it caught in my throat for just a second. Then Linda leaned over and said, "Blow it out, sweetheart, make a wish." I didn't have one. I already had everything I'd been wishing for. The trust did exactly what Grammy Rose had built it to do. On my 25th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Frank and Carol Bennett ended on the date, and the terms Grammy Rose had notarized 2 years before she died. The remainder passed to me through the bank trustee, untouched by the will my parents had revised, because you cannot disinherit someone from a trust you do not control. Their waiver, unsigned, was worth exactly what it had always been worth. Within 14 months, my parents sold the house on Clover Lane. Without the distributions, they couldn't carry it. They moved into a rental across town. I'm told Deborah was furious to discover that none of Grammy Rose's money would ever be flowing in Marcus's direction. The story of that dinner moved through the family the way those stories do, and then past it. The version where Carol is the devoted mother wronged by an ungrateful adopted daughter never quite held, because too many people at Harlow's had watched a woman scream about everything she'd paid for, while a quiet girl across the room held hands with the family she had chosen. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't post anything. I simply stopped answering, and I let the silence be the boundary, which is the only kind that ever actually holds. My dad texted me once about 3 weeks later, 3 words, "I am sorry," no explanation, no follow-up. When I didn't respond, he didn't try again. I heard later that when Deborah tried to organize a challenge to Grammy Rose's trust, it was Frank who shut it down quietly. Told them his mother had every right to leave her estate exactly where she chose, that it was hers, that it was done. He was right. He was also, as ever, about a year too late, and saying it to the wrong room, when saying it finally cost him nothing. That was my dad in full, a man who knew the right thing, could feel it in his chest, and could only ever bring himself to say it once the moment of real courage had passed. I didn't need the apology, but I was glad, in a small and tired way, that he had finally been right out loud. I spent my 25th birthday eating chocolate layer cake at table 11 with people who got nothing out of wanting me. And I have spent every birthday since at that same table. Linda and I talk every Sunday at 3 o'clock, the hour I used to save for Grammy Rose. Grandma Bev taught me her grilled cheese recipe, the same one Grammy Rose used to make me in her kitchen when I was 12 and crying and needed someone to remind me I was real. Kyle still sends memes. He sends them like I was always supposed to be in the thread. And somewhere in a drawer in Linda's kitchen, there is a photo album that doesn't close flat anymore because it finally has enough pages. Being useful was the only thing my parents ever actually wanted from me. Being wanted was the one thing I had never had. And it took me 25 years and one very carefully planned dinner to learn that anyone who only keeps you around for what you produce has already told you in the plainest language available that they were never really your family at all. That's the story. 24 years of one candle. And on the 25th, a whole table that lit one without being asked, without being thanked, without needing anything from me in return. If someone in your life only values you when you're useful to them, let this be the thing that reminds you. You do not have to earn the people who love you. You never did. Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had to stop being useful before someone finally showed you they actually wanted you? And subscribe to Hidden Karma Stories, because the next